everybody. Welcome in. Please get seated. So we're going to start with enabling accurate, decentralized root cause mapping at scale. So I'm going to pass it over to Erin, who's going to kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cassie. My name is Erin Alexander. I work for CISA. I am here to moderate a panel with some colleagues of mine. A little bit about me. I have been with CISA now for 7 years. I am a section chief leading a team, a unique team called Ecosystem Advancement, and we combine products, services, data, and analysis to drive progress forward in the global vulnerability ecosystem. So, as I said, I'm going to be the moderator for today's discussion, and I'm really excited about this topic. It's something that I am passionate about and enjoy working on here on my team on CISA. The discussion is titled Enabling Accurate Decentralized Root Cause Mapping at Scale. So I'm going to give a moment here and have everybody introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Levendis. I am the MITRE CVE and CWE project leader. Nice to see everybody.
Hi, everybody. My name is Deana O'Meara. I started off my career at the CIRT Coordination Center, which works at the intersection of the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and law enforcement. Since hopping into industry, I have run the PSIRT at Rockwell Automation, spent about 3 years at the Intel Corporation, and now I'm at NVIDIA.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alec Summers. I'm the day-to-day manager of the CWE team across its community engagement efforts and content development efforts and research and development. Thanks.
All right, now we know this is a big topic, and I want to make sure that I clearly articulate the goals for today's discussion. Today, we want to really flesh out ways people are using CWE to drive positive security change in their organization and really communicate day-to-day challenges of root cause mapping. We also want to discuss best practices to accurately identify weaknesses, and as the title of our talk suggests, how to do all of this in a decentralized way effectively. We kind of have a fun, as you can see from the screen, we have a fun way to set the tone for our discussion. And so we obviously have the images up here, but I want you all to picture a healthy human bone. We have the beautiful image from Deana here of the healthy human bone. But when picturing a healthy human bone, I hope you're picturing something strong, something dense, one that supports your body and helps you move around. But I want to associate that healthy human bone that you're picturing with software security. A healthy human bone in this context represents the secure by design methodology. They're functional and foundationally secure. But as we know, bones can break for a number of different reasons. We've got tumors and stress fractures and bone density loss and so on and so forth. But we want to say that not always are bones breaking due to an external force causing injury. Each of these reasons represent a different type of weakness. And that's our analogy for what we're going into here with the root cause mapping. But anything can lead to a healthy human bone breaking, right? Codes like these bones may contain weaknesses that can lead to unintended consequences or vulnerabilities. We can't diagnose or cure the injury without collecting information, prevalence, context. And you would want to treat every incident, I guess, with a breaking bone differently. So you're going to treat a tumor differently than you're going to treat a stress fracture. So that's the same as root cause mapping, and that's how we're going to move into some of our panel discussion today. So Chris, I want to start with you and provide a foundation for our audience. What is root cause mapping?
Thanks, Erin. So root cause mapping is a pretty straightforward proposition. It's a function of taking a vulnerability and aligning it with the problem or problems that led to the vulnerability. So if we think about weakness types in a software or hardware context, or even an architectural context or a systems context, they don't always become exploitable vulnerabilities, but quite often it is the case that they do. And so weaknesses are bad. We want to get rid of them as much as possible. And so root cause mapping takes us to a point where we can begin to understand why the weakness is there, so that we can remediate that weakness, so that it never becomes an exploitable vulnerability in the first place. But root cause mapping is really just as simple as understanding what a weakness is relative to the vulnerability that it's responsible for.
Now, Deana, why is doing root cause mapping valuable?
So I think that root cause mapping is valuable both from an ecosystem perspective and for those of us that are developing software, hardware. Ultimately, as Chris had mentioned, we do want to shift left and try and get rid of classes of vulnerabilities before they become exploitable out in the wild. So a lot of organizations across industry will invest in this and really use CWE as that mechanism to discuss vulnerabilities. We want to standardize. I think that's why many of us are here. Many of us work in CVE all of the time. And I think CWE lends itself to another method to standardize the way we talk about issues. We will be talking a little bit later about some techniques of how to do it, but it's both helpful at a micro level, the day-to-day, those of us that are in PSIRT that are working different types of tickets, and from an overall trend analysis level.
I think I want to jump in just from a CISA perspective here and say, why does root cause mapping benefit CISA? Obviously, it's really boils down to the trend analysis and identifying trends and following trends. We can really drive policy in the vulnerability management ecosystem. Alec, what are the challenges in doing root cause mapping, and why aren't people doing it effectively now?
Yeah, so there's actually a number of challenges. I would say from a data perspective, if we're all here thinking about the CVE landscape, very often the demand downstream for information about vulnerabilities has been, how severe is it? Is it relevant to me? Is there a patch? And not what is the root cause, right? What was responsible for the vulnerability in the first place? So that's one thing. Secondly, and one of the topics that's been discussed at length, and there's going to be more to come, is the usability of the CWE corpus. So CWE is written to be sort of it's a community developed list of weakness types in software and hardware, written from a language based on vulnerability theory. And fundamentally, there's a difference in the way vulnerabilities are described and what a vulnerability is versus a weakness, right? Very often, weakness is used to define a vulnerability. So, somebody might define vulnerability as a weakness in something, and that's not necessarily true. In the case of CWE, you might have one CWE that can manifest into thousands of different products. The same mistake, the same flaw can end up being responsible for vulnerabilities in many, many, many different products. So that's another. And then thirdly, with respect to the challenge of doing it, contributing from the usability problem of CWE, which we're looking to try and address, is also the idea of a capability potentially to facilitate easier mapping. As it stands, the CWE corpus has, over 900 weaknesses in it. Starting from scratch every time you have a vulnerability to try and find what that weakness is a big, big, big challenge. And we've got different ways to go about trying to find one. Ideally, you want to map to something that is actionable. And so being able to help people who are just learning about how to do this, going from a vulnerability potentially to identify what its root cause is, or, at the time of disclosure, this is something that we want to try and help people get, faster at, better at.
I just want to add, I think from an industry perspective, what we really want to do is be able to, as Alec mentioned, be able to give a name to some of those weaknesses and then ultimately push that back into our SDLs. So if we can get rid of classes of issues, if we can identify the type of issue, whether it's a human bone or not, I think that benefits us. I know from at least my perspective, working in the industry, we get a lot of questions from our customers too, but what are the problems? What does the CVE mean beyond just severity? And I think that this is a really important way, again, for us to be able to discuss issues a little bit more holistically.
Thanks, Deana and Alec. Chris, what is the value benefit proposition, and what are organizations going to get out of this by participating in root cause mapping disclosure?
So if we start thinking about that from a macro sense, you touched on this in terms of why it's important to CISA, but really why it's important to society, right? So from a macro sense, it's important to understand what kind of categories of weaknesses are killing us the most. Because that's what weaknesses do. That's the reason why we're all here, because they exist, they turn into exploitable vulnerabilities, and then we're constantly reacting. So from a macro sense, it lets us look across industry and sectors and however you want to slice and dice it and understand, right, our memory safety issues, the most important category of weakness types that we need to worry about. Is it injection issues? Probably both of those we should be worried about. Or is it something else? And as the landscape shifts over time, then you can start understanding what's working, where policies need to be made, where investments need to be made. And Deana, from an NVIDIA perspective, what do you think about that?
I think I speak again for industry that we just want to be able to give the right name to the issue, right? So whether it is in semiconductors, whether it is us at NVIDIA, whether it's us across industry, we want to be working with our product teams in order to properly identify that root cause. Again, this goes back into how do you make adjustments to your SDL? Do you add in new tasks? Do you work with your product teams to view security differently? Ultimately, again, we're all here because we understand the CVE problem, but imagine a world where we have fewer CVEs because we were able to wipe out issues. I think that's kind of our goal, whether you are developing software, hardware, you're in services, whatever that might be. That coordination between those of us in the PSIRT community and our product teams is so important. We need to be able to give them the language to use such to make CVE better, to make our relations with our customers better, and ultimately make the ecosystem better. And hopefully that helps out the different initiatives at CISA, that MITRE hosts, or what have you, from looking at it from a very high level perspective as well.
And Deana, if I can just foot stomp that. Excuse me. So I'm the MITRE CVE project leader. Wouldn't it be great if we could put CVE out of business? Wouldn't it be great if we weren't constantly reacting and we were getting left of boom and dealing with problems there, as opposed to having to deal with exploitable vulnerabilities out in the universe? So I'm not silly. I mean, we're not even close to an outcome of not having to respond to vulnerabilities, but wouldn't it be great if we could do that a whole lot less, because we've built all that stuff in? So I just wanted to foot stomp that. And Erin, over to you.
Thank you both. And Deana, you touched on this with your last answer, but I want to more explicitly ask, why is it important to include root cause mapping as part of vulnerability disclosure?
I've noticed, at least in my career, that the organizations that I've worked in have really invested heavily in trying to, again, understand why the problems are happening. And a lot of times this leads to things like education, training initiatives, and just to be able to, you want to enable the business to do better. The way that we're able to do this is by standardization, working with organizations like MITRE, working across industry here. And I think part of what we want to do, at least for the root cause mapping working group, is to get other perspectives. So for those of you out here who are struggling with either communicating with your engineers, how they are trying to understand the problem, please come join us. We want to be able to have these conversations. We want representation across industry. We want those diverse opinions such that, again, we want to be able to enable folks. That's the whole purpose of why we're here, is to help identify the problems and then identify solutions long term.
So Deana, you brought up the root cause mapping working group. Alec, I know that you're involved in sharing that. Can you tell us about the root cause mapping working group, please?
Sure. Yeah, so this working group is a really exciting one from my perspective, because it was really brought about by the community itself. This is a working group that was brought from members of the CVE community, as well as members of the CWE community. There are those that work in both spaces, but what's really exciting about this is that it was brought as a need from that community to really operate at the nexus of where those programs meet. And as Deana alluded to, some of our initial goals really are understanding and drafting and sort of propagating the idea of the business case value for doing root cause mapping, and sort of the internal benefits for an organization that they can have and see reaping the rewards of sort of understanding through the system development lifecycle, their software development lifecycle, what can be seen when they start to do this in action, right? And start to not make the same mistakes in products as they come out. The working group is really open to anyone. It's an open forum. We're really hoping that those throughout the vulnerability management ecosystem, especially CNAs of all kinds, can join us and talk about the challenges in doing it if they've started to. Also, just learn more about how to do it. One thing is for sure is that the new CVE data format facilitates this very well to map, you know, a CVE record that you are disclosing and you want to identify what the root cause of it is in the form of a CWE. That's something that's very exciting that you can do now. So learning things like that, but also telling us of the challenges, right? And how we, as for example, speaking on behalf of the CWE program, how we can do things better, how we can provide better guidance, better information that could be beneficial to those that are trying to do this. I'll take the opportunity to simply plug that we literally just published new guidance on root cause mapping on the CWE website, sort of secretly on Friday, but I'm sort of announcing it now that it's there. You'll see our little dinosaur logo guy for root cause mapping on the landing page that you can get a sticker for out front as well. But hammering home, if you are interested, please do reach out to us. There's really a lot of ways that you could, but the first that comes to mind is just emailing cwe@mitre.org. That's a great way. And we can share lots of materials and welcome you to the group.
Thanks, Alec. Thanks all of the panelists for your answers. We do have plenty of time for questions from the audience. So if anybody would like to ask their burning question, now is the time.
Hi, hello. Thank you for that. It was a really good overview. I want to it's great that you have someone from the CVE program on the panel and also Deana and Alec. I wanted to take what you're saying about CWE and also CNA program, for example, and ask why the CNA program doesn't require that a CNA must assign a CWE. And sort of tied to that also, is there a way to incentivize the assigning of a CWE specifically through the lens of the CNA program?
So that is a great question, Lindsay. You know, garbage in, garbage out. We know that we have a usability problem on CWE. We know it, we know it, we know it. Wall of text, superfluous information, not enough information, difficult to pivot to action. We've heard all of this from the community, and we really appreciate that feedback, and we want to continue to get that feedback from the community. So if we don't make CWE easier to use as a corpus of information that helps people pivot to action, then we can require it, and you know, you probably get one of three possibilities. A handful of CNAs know how to do root cause mapping well, and they just provide CWEs with their CVE records. Okay, great. The vast majority of CNAs will just provide, because of the difficulty in using the CWE corpus, they'll just provide bad data. And so now we have an even bigger problem than we have today. And then I think a third outcome is CNAs might just say, yeah, the CVE program's not worth it. We're going to take our football and go home. And so all of this leads to the need to make CWE easier to understand and easier to select and easier to use. And so, for example, we've now had many dozens of people tell us that they need some kind of down select capability when they're searching the CWE corpus. So as they type information in, they can choose from not 1,000 weakness types, but maybe just 2 or 3, and then they can, you know, if we simplify the entries, they're much easier to consume and get through. So we know we have this problem, and so that's why we don't make it a requirement of the CVE program. Now, maybe in time, as we get better at doing this, maybe there's a time where the CVE board will consider doing that and making it a requirement. But I think there's almost a unanimous position on the board that if we were to try to do this now, we would just create a larger problem for ourselves to no good end. Did that touch on both of your questions? All right, great. Thanks for asking.
There's one other point I would mention that we didn't really hammer home, and apologies because we want to get to all the questions too. The idea of federating root cause mapping. We know that it's of the opinion of those that are joining the root cause mapping working group between the CVE and the CWE communities that really this is the way to grow and to scale this solution, right? The idea of people, if I can say, CNAs being those that understand their products more than anybody else, right, are well positioned, are best positioned really to provide the information as to the root cause behind the vulnerability in question. And so it's our sort of firm belief, and we posit that we want to investigate and scale this program and this idea of root cause mapping as part of vulnerability disclosure through a federation model. That is to say that we want those out there that are doing disclosure to provide this information. They are best positioned to do it. It will scale that way. If it is a centralized way to do it, we run into problems around scale and growth.
And just really quickly, we learned this lesson on the CVE program. If we hearken back to the days of 2015, around that time frame, everything was stuck. Everything was kind of in paralysis. The program was really not going in the right direction, and federation was kind of the new truth that set us free. And so we want to apply those lessons to CWE, to root cause mapping. The people who own the code are best suited to provide the weakness type relative to a vulnerability. No matter how smart, for example, we think we are, we don't own the code. And so it's really important for the people who own the code to provide that data. I think that's critically important. We've heard from industry partners like NVIDIA, for example, that really want to do that as effectively as possible. And that's why Alec mentioned the CVE program data format. That's why we're changing the data format so that industry partners can provide that data. Over.
Hey there. All right. Great stickers, by the way. I highly recommend everyone get one. My question would be, what is the biggest challenge that a CNA faces when assigning a root cause or CWE in general? Is it like an education barrier? Is it kind of an effort barrier?
I think it could be a multifaceted problem. In my experience, I think sometimes there seems to be too many options to choose from, and then you have analysis paralysis of what is the right option. So I think from a CNA perspective, you want to go as low as you can, but sometimes there's hesitation to report out that lowest CWE. So you go higher, 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 thinking that you are helping your customers by communicating out something extremely general. And I think what winds up happening is just due to that effort, you kind of dilute the message. So I think part of it is education. Part of it is working with your product teams and enabling them to assign, and then not being afraid, right? I think there's a little bit of a hesitation. This is like, kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit. There's a little bit of a hesitation, I think, to go deeper down the tree, when in fact, I think all of us deal with certain classes of issues. And if we can work together, I think we can come to more creative solutions. But so much of it, at least in my experience, is education, getting people comfortable with how far down the CWE tree is, and then getting them comfortable with reporting out. So in general, I want to make better data-driven decisions. The only way that I can do that is by collecting the data that I need. And I really see CWE as the way to help my organization and other organizations be able to collect that data and, again, make a data-driven decision.
Ooh.
Thank you all for the presentation and for all the work you do for the ecosystem. I'm biased. I've worked with 2 organizations in the industry that are big supporters and contributors to CWE. So I'm curious. So I have a question and then a request. My question is, again, with my bias, I think everybody does it, but could you maybe give us an approximation of, of all the CNAs or CVEs, give me an approximate percentage of how many people are issuing CWEs correctly or at all? And then have you considered a CNA-like program where there's some training, some mentorship to help teach people to do a better job of that root cause analysis?
So I can give you an answer. Well, I can answer both questions, but the percentage of data or the percentage of CNAs submitting weakness types and doing that correctly, very low, probably lower than 20%. If you look at all of the CVE data combined, about 40% of it has a weakness or even more generally a problem type associated with it. And an unknown large percentage of that data is not accurate. And we know this by doing things like putting together the CWE top 25 most dangerous software list. We can deduce data and that, these trends that way. Difficult and centralized and, consistent with Alec's point, we want to decentralize a lot of this to the people who know the best. And then, yes, we have considered kind of we would never call it this, but kind of a gold star, red star system, right? What I lived with in elementary school, where if you got an A on the test, you got a gold star next to your name, and if you got what I typically would get on the test, you'd get a red star next to your name. So we've thought about that. We've thought about data credibility kind of scoring systems. There's a lot of problems with whatever we end up picking. But I think we're going to end up selecting something because it's just clear we need to do something like that. And it'd be great if we had a way, if you think about the thumbs up, thumbs down rating system, maybe we could put that on CNA containers, for example, or right, and people could be the crowd could begin to kind of build credibility or lack thereof in the data that they're seeing. So we've talked about a lot of this, and now we kind of have to go to the next step and figure out what are we going to do, right? How do we start putting this stuff in place? Does that answer your question?
I do want to touch on the CNA part of it and asking how are we going to train them? We have considered CISA is a root CNA. We have considered adding that to our CNA onboarding process. That's something that we're looking at doing possibly in the future. Did you want to add anything to this? Okay. Any
All
other
right, we did have
questions?
hold on, Pete. We did have a question from online. Security vulnerability can originate from an implementation bug or often insecure design architecture, but sometimes bad requirements for the product or solution. Would the root cause mapping program go all the way? Sometimes multiple root causes may contribute to a single vulnerability.
Well, I'm not sure I really understood.
I think that at least the way I'm reading it, what if it seems like there's multiple root causes and it doesn't seem like there's a clear one answer?
So there is a precedent for this that we've been talking about a little bit in the root cause mapping working group, but previously in the CWE community with respect to multiple CWEs. Chains is really the term that's being used very often. For example, from our Jeopardy, where we had the log4shell vulnerability come up. If you look that up in the NVD, I think it maps to 4 CWEs. And so, yes, it's certainly possible. The question was phrased in a way of how far back do we go? One of the things that I think is a binding set of circumstances in what we're talking about with root cause mapping in this context is pairing of the CVE record with one or more CWEs. I think a lot of people would say, well, that could mean the CWE scope could expand and we could cover a lot of different things. And that may be true as we go forward, but there are certain things that simply are not going to be part of the root cause mapping chain, so to speak, with respect to, for example, human weakness decision-making or, there's certain scope exclusions in that regard. So that's one thing that I would say in addition to that, but the concept around chaining is something that we certainly can support. I think in the new JSON format, right? In addition to just having one CWE, you can certainly add another. So that's what I would say about that.
The challenge for many of us is in CWE, there's too many options. And it makes it very hard because when we look at the data, being able to go back to engineering and say, we need to eliminate this class supply, the current practice hasn't led us there. It's driven us crazy for the last 2 years. We're looking for a simplification of it. And I like the idea of chaining, because chaining then shows that if condition A, then condition B could result in X, but if condition C is here, maybe not. That's important because that's the only way you can get to a developer organization to think differently. And the key here is about thinking. Then it becomes a matter of reporting. So the one part is making sure we make it simple enough that we can apply it. And I haven't been able to find it. We believe in it, but we haven't found it. That's the key part. And then the part about, does a CNA do that? I'm only a voice, but I'm going to push that the CNAs have to do it. And Erin, I like the idea that the roots need to provide the governance to drive their CNAs to get there. Because if we don't fix this part, I don't see CWE ever becoming used. It's a great idea then, and it's not used. We have to force that.
Right. So I could not agree more. And I know I'm speaking for Alec, I'm speaking for Deana, speaking for Erin. When we think about usability, so the first time I ever looked at CWE, I was like, what's this? I mean, this is, am I supposed to memorize this stuff? It was just really, it was bloated. It's confusing. It's oriented towards power users. I think that's all wrong. I think it needs to be oriented towards people who have day jobs and don't have time to attend a university class to learn and understand. And so we get this. So now the question is, and looking forward to working with you and your guys, Pete, as we move forward. Now the key is, how do we get it right? Right. It's not, we're fully aware that there are many challenges with CWE, but now it's working with the community, right? With the Red Hats, with the Microsofts, with everybody, with NVIDIA, right? To figure out, how do we make the simplifications necessary so that you can use it, so that it does enable a pivot to action? And that's really a phrase I like. It's everything we do in cybersecurity. If it's just information that's nice to know, well, who really cares about that? I mean, that's not helpful to anybody. We want to be able to pivot to action. So I just want to make it clear to everybody in the room, we get this, right? We understand that there are some problems here. And again, I really want to foot stomp this point that without the community, we won't be able to fix it, right? It's not, the answer to these challenges doesn't come out of a single organization, period. Does that address what you're talking about, Pete?
Join that.
Agreed, concur.
Now they bring me the mic. But the point here is, we talk about it. I don't want to be, well, here's what we're doing in the panel and here's what we did behind the scenes. I want the crowd to be accepting of, we need to engage that and try it. If we don't make that either work or fail, we miss the point of this conference. And that's the part I want to drive. You know, I'm going to work with Chris and everyone up on the stage. How do we do it from Red Hat? But until we try it and fail, I don't know when to abandon it. But I got to stop monkeying around with information. I need data that's actual.
Yeah, and I just add before the next question. Tomorrow there's going to be a talk. I'm giving a talk about CWE and its current state and road ahead, and talking very well, I think clearly about some of our plans around usability at both the macro level of how weaknesses are grouped on the site, like understanding, you know, if you know a little bit about what you're looking for, being able to find it faster. When it comes to the idea of what to map to as well, one of the things that we've seen over time, and we've started to implement change in the corpus, is that the CWE corpus really has hierarchies from very abstract concepts to very, you know, specific technology specific, you know, language specific weaknesses. And when it comes to root cause mapping, there's really a difference. You know, you don't want to be mapping to things that are so abstract. They're not providing you value. They're not actionable. And so that's part of the guidance I'll talk about in the talk, but we added now any CWE that you go to at the top now has a label that says for vulnerability mapping. And if it's one to choose, and there's mapping notes associated with all of them that you can just jump right down to. Why? Because sometimes, I'll be honest, the CWE corpus, in addition to its many challenges, is not robust in the same way across the whole corpus. I was talking to somebody earlier today, the access control tree of CWE is something that has needed help for a long time. You know, other trees are very robust and filled out. The buffer overflow tree, you know, certainly has, you know, some language issues that we can address and improve, no doubt. However, it has been studied to death over the last several decades, and it's very, very strong. It's very full and complete, I would say. Other parts of CWE aren't necessarily like that. So that's a content development stage. But with respect to mapping, those are some things that I would encourage people to check out, and hopefully you'll be able to come to the talk tomorrow. I can be a little more specific on that too.
Any other questions? Mr. Kovnik?
I do have one question. I have like 25 questions, but I will ask this one. Deana, I appreciate that you came to present from this sort of like vendor, manufacturer, producer perspective. I think that's really valuable. I have a question. Feel free to answer to your comfort level, but I'm really curious. I think this would help me understand better how to talk about CWE assignment and usage within an organization when I go talk to organizations. How do you report that information up and out in your organization? Do you, or do you use it mostly to facilitate action within your teams, or is it something that you're being required to sort of report up and out?
I mean, that's a really good question. And I think I'm just going to speak broadly. I think it really depends on the organization you're talking to, the place in the organization. So if you go and talk to a PSIRT organization, they might give you a little bit of a different answer. In general, I want to use CWE as my way to have conversations, impactful conversations with my product teams, right? I want to work with them to assign the CWE and then adjust my SDL to meet that need. So I'm with Pete on this. I want to be able to push the industry such that we feel comfortable reporting out. Some organizations do, some don't. And I think without all of us kind of singing in concert, we're not going to be able to kind of move in that direction. So I'm happy to chat after if you want to know a little bit more. I mean, I can give you my perspective, but I really think to Alec and to Chris's point, CWE has its challenges, and we want to be able to fix those challenges. So it really, I think from an industry perspective, you view CWE through the lens of your industry. So I realize that's kind of not the best answer, but I'm always happy to chat if you have, what'd you say? Yeah. But we can chat after, but I do think it's an important one. And with some of the changes that Alec had just mentioned that were launched and working with us within the root cause mapping working group, you know, we really want to push ourselves to do better. I want to see us do better.
I think in a really fundamental way, whether it's through the root cause mapping working group or, you know, working with Pete and his team, for example, what you're hearing from us is we're searching for the right levers to pull so that we can move the needle on these problems. I just want to, I just really want to foot stomp that point because it's so important. I mean, we've learned over the years, and I'm laughing because
it's because you're having the same conversation over and
no,
over.
no, it's because I hear criticism, and we deserve criticism, right? So I don't have a problem with hearing the criticism, but right now we're trying to move into the solution space to push to get to the right spot with these programs. And so that's what we want to work with the community to do is really, you know, find those right levers to pull so that we can get to a better spot. And so if you walk away with only one point, I think a really important point is that we want CWE to be a entirely community-driven program that works for the community of stakeholders. It's really important, and Deana's absolutely right. You know, depending on where you come from, that's how you're going to have a specific lens that you look at CWE through. So, just want to drive that point home.
I think the last thing that maybe this is the elephant in the room is that we're embarking on technology that's new for us, and we need different language potentially to describe some of those problems in the solutions. So many of us have been in like purely the software space or purely the hardware space. Now you have AI kind of laid on top of that. And what does that mean for the community? I think a lot of us are kind of grappling with that. And the only way that we can make, I mean, there are lots of ways to make positive change, but the way that I want to make positive change is by working with all of you on these future challenges too. So it's not only kind of going back and looking at the past of where we've been, but positioning CWE to also be actionable and continue to be actionable in the future.
I think earlier, well, really quickly, I thought there was a question from way in the back. Yeah.
I waited patiently. It was a long and unexpected journey. So my question is around the making of choosing CWEs easier. When I'm trying to train new analysts on how to do things like CVSS scoring and choosing the right CWE and basically the whole vulnerability reporting process, one of the hardest things they have is figuring out the connection between a CVE and a CWE. And one of the things that I've been teaching to do is basically Google dork it, where you end up creating customized queries in Google to search for previously known CVEs that have some kind of record of what CWE they map to. So that way the person who's unfamiliar with the text or the code, because you already said the person who knows the code best is the developer, but I can't always raise the bar with them and have them be able to choose a CWE. So would it make sense for the CWE website to have like a filtering option that uses something like natural language processing, additional tagging, some additional correlation stuff that shows existing correlations and relationships between CVEs and CWEs to make it easier for people that don't understand the calculator to find them?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So a couple things. Within the CWE website, we do have in the schema something that we call observed examples, which is a curated list of specific CVEs of that weakness manifest in the world. So for example, when you go to CWE 89, which is our improper neutralization of special elements in a SQL command, most commonly known as SQL injection, and you go down on the page, or you can actually use our filters at the top. You can do a customized filter feature and focus on observed examples alone. That is a curated list of exactly what you're talking about, which are sort of examples of CVE records. Now, I take that the point, or rather the workflow that you're talking about, though, is understanding going from, maybe a vulnerability down to find its appropriate CWE rather than sort of examples of what it currently exists. I think there's value potentially there. The search feature, the navigability feature is certainly something that we can improve without question in CWE. And there's a lot being expressed in different circles around how to do that. Chris mentioned sort of a decision tree tool or a sort of a click-through tool, which is sort of like, okay, if we go start at the very high level, what is the fundamental nature of the problem? And then go down the list, sort of using the schema as a model, so to speak, to get through to something specific that you might map to. That's something we're exploring. There's also been discussions around how far currently does chat bot technology get you. We've done a little bit of testing with that to mixed results. In addition to that, we do have a search feature on the landing page of CWE. You can put in language like that, but truth be told, it's powered by Google and it does its own sort of Google search on our site. I think I answered some parts of the question, but I did want to confirm that side of it, which is that firstly, there is observed examples for all CWEs on those pages. You can find examples of them. As I mentioned, they are a curated list, which means we don't update that every day that there's 10 new SQL injection vulnerabilities. It's just these are specific examples that demonstrate in some way. Now, lastly, I'll also say there is demonstrative examples, which are literally code examples from a sort of toy application that are in as well in the schema, which provide literal code from a non-existent product showing the weakness in action. But I want to be sure that I answered the question effectively. Does that sort of? Okay. I might have heard one thing and turned one direction. Chris, do you want to?
Well, so I heard a fellow the other day assert that AI has already solved the problem of weakness selection. And that just made me want to laugh. As Alec indicated, we've experimented with this stuff, and you can get a corpus of information with some kind of ML or AI overlay on it to return a weakness result. It's just the wrong weakness type a lot of the time. So that's just to say that your question is indicative of the work we still have to do. I think when we put in what I call a weakness identification capability to aid human beings in being able to select the right weakness type, that capability will not be perfect when we get it out there. We have to build on what we have today. And what I hope is that over time, and by time I mean the near term, that AI and NLP, all of the great technology that exists will become part and parcel with that effort. That's the best we've got right now. So I don't know if that better answers your question at all or not, but.
Can you hear me better this time?
Can I ask you a question back?
Yes.
Do you have like a vertical in mind that can be more robust, or is there a gap?
So how you guys explained searching through and the tooling available and the information available makes perfect sense. I know that they exist. The hardest part is taking that junior member of the team or a mid-tier level member of the team and get them to use those tools. Like, how do I train them on those tools? What kind of docs can they read to get it? And then because of that, when they're reading the material to learn how to use those tools, one of the issues that always happens is the amount of questions I get back while trying to get them onboarded to the tool. So something with, I don't want to call it user experience, probably not documentation, but like the way you were talking about a wizard or something that helps guide them through the process would be incredibly helpful to take those members who are having difficulty using the existing tools, because the tools are very robust. I use them myself to find stuff. But if the person who I'm getting to train to use it has no idea how to use these things, I basically become their Sherpa or their Google and answer all of their questions for them. How do we take me out of the equation and allow that information to scale to allow those junior members to leverage those tools more effectively?
So your suggestion is really one of how do we reduce the transaction costs around using those tools, those capabilities? That's right. That's exactly right. And we need to hear suggestions like that and figure out how to roll those into the mix, because, if using the tool is just as difficult as just reading the text, then we haven't really accomplished anything. That's kind of what I think.
I would just take one opportunity too, because it is brand new, the new mapping guidance on the website. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that. cwe.mitre.org. It is right front and center now to just click right to that link that will take you to it. It does walk through the process, and I wonder how helpful that will be. It is not by any means a done and dusted thing, and we'd love to iterate on it and make it better.
This is actually a question for me, not online. I think to that point, one of the things that I notice with CWE is it seems almost like too much, like we're trying to get to the exact right thing. And I think that some of the hesitancy around using it is that it's a lot of arguing, I guess, right? To debating of what's the exact right one to pick. And to Deana's point, I think knowing that is useful internally when you're trying to drive changes. But I guess from your point of view, what's the usefulness of answering that externally to others? Is it better to have just the higher categorization, or is that level of detail really needed?
So let's go back to our bones example, right? I think some of us can, if you're a doctor, you might want to zoom in so narrowly on the stress fracture itself, right? If you are a doctor at a conference, you might want to talk about the bone as it is, right? And I think for us as practitioners, we need to be able to strike that balance. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Cassie, and how what is that balance and how do we strike it? I think, at least from my perspective, that's why we need to have these conversations. Like, I've seen engineers kind of rat hole down like into the fracture itself when that's not valuable, right? You want to understand the impacts to the rest of the body, for example. So I don't want to speak for, for MITRE in this, but I think in general, we need to work with folks like you, like others, to hit that balance. What is that balance? And it's going to probably be different, product team to product team. But for me, it's that language. Like, how do I communicate to you, Cassie, exactly what you need to know about a particular issue? And I feel like that's a work in progress. And Chris and Alec kind of hit it home that we know that there are problems. The question is, how do we work together on that solution and understand what the right view is? Because we might not want to go all the way down, but if I'm looking at a broken bone, I might not want to be looking at a cadre of people to analyze a broken femur. So I think it's about striking that balance. And the question is how? And part of that is by having these sorts of conversations.
All right, any other questions for our panelists? I'm coming.
Thank you. Okay, so do you have a favorite CWE? And if so, what is it?
I might have one, and it's because I was never allowed to use it. But there is a hardware CWE that has the word dangerous in it. Do you remember that, Crove? You know what I'm talking about. And I so badly want to be able to use it, but a legal team will, and I quote, never allow it. So, again, from my perspective, I don't want to live in an ivory tower where I am opining things I think about industry. From my perspective in industry, I wish I could use some really poignant CWEs, but I might not be able to. So I think that, or the data deserialization one, which I do believe was like the primary cause for Log4Shell. So I think between those two, yeah, that's just me though.
I don't remember the number.
What's yours? Okay.
I don't have a favorite CWE, but one of the things I really enjoy about this is the community interaction, and that's what we've heard today with Peter getting involved, and obviously my esteemed panel here today. I thank you all for your answers. Thank you all for the discussion and the questions that you've provided to this really important topic. This is really why we're here at VulnCon this week, to discuss weaknesses and to discuss how we're going to move that forward. So thank you all very much. And again, the underlying theme is that call to action that we really need people to participate in the root cause mapping working group. Thank you.